Okay, we're just a couple minutes after 6 here. We're gonna get started here, see a few more people to join. But for those of you who are with us tonight already, thank you for joining us on today for our webinar with learning some ADU insights from city staff from Larkspur, Corte Madera, and hopefully Sausalito. We're having a little technical issue getting Sausalito into the webinar, but we're hopefully they're going to join us before too much longer. And as we get started, I'm Scott Johnson. I'm the director of the ADU Center, and I want to give us a little introduction to who we are as an organization and how we fit into the ADU world in Marin County. And then we'll go into introducing the panelists that we have, and we'll talk about some of the insights that they have learned about permitting and building ADUs in their towns over the last 4 years. I'm with the ADU Center, and we are a nonprofit that has partnered with Marin County and many of the jurisdictions in Marin County to help homeowners gain a good understanding of what is needed to build and be successful with their ADU project. All of our tools can be found at adumarin.org. Which is the website that provides ADU information and tools for homeowners for across Marin County in all the cities. My experience is I'm also the director of the Napa Sonoma ADU Center, where we do the same things for Napa and Sonoma as we have been for the past 4 years. We're now bringing all those lessons learned and all those tools that we developed for Napa and Sonoma, and we're bringing them to the homeowners of Marin. We're really excited to be able to do that for everyone. So if you're interested in the ADU project, I say usually the first stop is go to adumarin.org. That is going to be your sort of your central database for tools and information and resources to help you understand and get started with your ADU project. One of the things that we've just started doing as of 2 weeks ago is we now do one-on-one feasibility consultations. So if you're thinking about an ADU and the rules and the options are a little bit too confusing, you can sign up to have a 1-hour conversation with either myself or another one of our ADU experts here at the center to talk through your particular property, your particular goals and needs and budget, and help you understand as much as we can give you in that hour how to get started. In addition to the consultations, we have other less interactive tools. We have a workbook there, which is I think it's probably an 80-page document, 90-page document with exercises and information and kind of a lot of the framework about what to know about ADUs and how to start your ADUs and how to think about your ADU project. It's really, you can download a PDF. Sometimes when we do live events, we'll have print versions that you can get from us when we're there. But there are other tools there as well. There's a cost calculator for Marin, which can help you work through the costs and potential return of building an ADU based on different sizes and types of construction, whether it's difficult on a hillside or it's relatively typical. And this is to start to give you a ballpark idea of what ADU projects tend to cost, both in terms of construction, but also in terms of how to finance it, what those numbers would look like, what the rents would look like, and does the project make sense financially? There's also on the website, there's information about each city rules. We've got stories and floor plans of ADU homeowners who have built in Marin and been successful. This is our first webinar for 2024. There'll be more as we go out throughout the year. There's 3 this week covering 9 jurisdictions in Marin County. And then again, the consultations, which I can't recommend enough. If you're curious about an ADU, but you're kind of having a hard time getting started, let us know, sign up for a consultation. We can walk you through those early steps. And tonight we're going to be able to we're lucky to have, we have folks from both Larkspur and Corte Madera tonight. And it looks like we don't yet have Sausalito, but hopefully they'll be able to join us before too long. And I should say we have Amity with us, who's going to be dropping links in chat that'll be useful for you to look at the resources that we talk about, and she's providing our technical back-end support for us. So thank you, Amity, for joining us as always. Tonight we've got myself, obviously. We've got two people from Corte Madera, but it's not Amy tonight. It's Martha Battaglia and Tracy Haggerty, both planners at Corte Madera. We've got Bill Hansel, the chief building official from Larkspur, and Alex Othon, the senior planner. And if we can get Robert Busick on tonight, we'll have him as well. And if we can't get him on tonight, we'll have another webinar with him another time. But hopefully we can get him in before too much longer. And I want to be clear kind of where we're talking about part of the project. An ADU project that takes a number of steps to get through to be complete. And tonight, we're really focusing on where the city interacts with that. So permitting, dialogue with the city about your project, learning about your property, learning about the rules. That's kind of the focus we have, as opposed to design or the actual construction or thinking about your project pre-construction. We're really focusing on the permitting side of things tonight. And I think the next slide has the process map. Yeah, so this is one of the pages that comes in our report. This is essentially a 10-step process map that talks about the different steps that you need to take to work through and be successful with your ADU project. And we're kind of in the middle section. We're steps 4 through 8 about getting city's advice, getting your permit, getting your application package filed, and how all that works. And so with all that, I want to thank everybody, all the city staff, to join me tonight. It's been great to get to know you better as we got prepared for this webinar, and really happy to have your experience in having ADUs be built in Marin over the last 4 years. And so I think, maybe to start with that, we can kind of go over some of the basics of what are the rules. We can't go into all the depths of the rules, but what are some of the broad strokes of the rules for building an ADU in your cities? And maybe I will call on Martha.
So I'll start with kind of some of the basics: height of your ADU and also size of your ADU. So in Corte Madera, we allow an attached ADU. If you have an ADU that's attached to your main house, to be up to 25 feet in height. And that was recently amended as a result of state law that went into effect in January, I believe. If you're building a detached ADU, then you're limited to a height of 16 feet. And we also allow ADUs to be above a garage. And in that case, your ADU could be 25 feet as well. So a word of caution: if you're building an ADU in a floodplain and it's detached, sometimes homeowners run into difficulties with that because you need to raise your ADU 1 foot above the base flood elevation. So oftentimes it can be challenging to meet those requirements and then also fall below the 16-foot height limit. So just something to think about if you are in a flood zone. And then as far as size goes, we have allow 1-bedrooms to be 850 square feet, and then a 2-bedroom can be 1,000 square feet. And then homeowners can go up to 1,200 square feet with a discretionary design review process. Right. Tracy, do you want to add to any of that, Tracy?
No, well said.
Alex, you want to, for City of Larkspur?
Sure. Yeah, I think it will be much of the same information. We have the same height limitation: 16 feet detached, 25 feet if it's attached to the main home. Like Corte Madera, fine to do them above the garage. We do have the similar size limitations. 850 is the max for a 1-bedroom, 1,000 for a 2-bedroom, and then 3 bedrooms can go to 1,200 square feet. We do not require design review for those bigger units, though that would be the difference with Larkspur. And as far as parking goes, our ordinance does require parking. However, there is an exception built in there that says if you're near a transit stop, you don't have to provide it. And that basically exempts, I would say, 95% of the town from needing parking. It's really going to be just those properties in the very north parts of Greenbrae that are going to be the ones who would have to provide a parking space. We do have the similar floodplain issues and wildland urban interface issues, the WUI, as people might know it. I'll leave those for Bill to discuss a little further if he would like to later on. But those are, common issues here that we have. I don't know if there's anything else, Bill, you wanna add?
Sure. Scott, do you want me to just jump in, kind of continue with Larkspur, or if you
Sure,
want to? Okay,
absolutely.
because clearly I'm representing more of the building permitting side here, separate from the planning permit. So, the uh, the city, and for some context, I'll tell you, I'm also the district manager of the Alto Sanitary District, small district sanitary district in Mill Valley. So I've dealt with a lot of interaction between building permits for ADUs as well as sanitary permits, and then I've been an architect for a long time, submitting in different areas, so I can address sort
You
of a
see a
broad
lot.
range of different types of things. But I can tell you that what I'm used to trying to is from the applicants and planning standpoint, project planning standpoint, is that while the planning department and planning approvals are would restrict or determine the envelope of the building and setbacks, et cetera, building height. Building and life safety obviously is more concerned with the typical building code issues such as egress, safe ingress and egress for the residents of the ADU as well as for firefighters, emergency workers, needing to access a structure. So even though in a general sense we are complying with state regulations to move forward, reviewing these ADUs and taking barriers down to allowing them to happen, they still need to comply with basic building safety codes. And that's across the board from the California residential code to the electrical code, green building code, et cetera. So that's where my interface happens. And one thing to be prepared for is in applications is to making sure that the building, whether it's an existing building that's being legalized or whether it's a new building, we still need to have proper documentation that shows the scope of the work. So that would be, a site plan, shows the context, floor plans, that show a sufficient amount of detail that we could, see all of the relevant building code issues. So, for example, if there's if there's a one bedroom, it would have to have the egress requirements in terms of window sizes, things like that.
Sure.
And I've also been a fire administrator, and I'll tell you, we processed a lot of ADU permits. And you should be aware that from the fire department side, there's an interface with similar issues of life safety, obviously. So that's where the WUI, concerns about making sure that the structure is fire resistant in those WUI required areas, come into play. So there's a little bit of an overlap between those two. The other overlap between fire and building is when it comes to sprinklers requirements, which an existing building, existing single family residence that isn't sprinklered, that adds an ADU, does not require sprinklers for the ADU, except if there are certain conditions that would create the need for it, such as too far of a distance from the street. Um, um, if there is a existing house that is sprinklered and an ADU is added, then that would have to be sprinkled. So um, maybe I'll just leave it at that and we'll
Yeah, well,
jump off from there.
you bring up a lot of really great points, and there's actually a couple of threads here that I want to kind of explore a little bit more in depth as we go on. But when I look at these, when we do our consultations, usually the first thing I look at is, I always ask the owner, sort of, do you have the space to build what you want to build? Can you stay out of the setbacks? There are reduced setbacks for ADUs, typically 4 feet from side and rear. Front setbacks tend to be a little bit trickier depending on what the situation is. And I often say, both, and you guys have heard me say this, and the homeowners hear me say this, almost every ADU is an edge case of some kind. And so while we're speaking in generalities tonight, if you are curious about your ADU, definitely talk with us, talk with your city, talk with your staff, because there are so many facets to this. ADUs are a lot easier to build than they were 5 years ago, much easier to build than they were 5 years ago, but you're still building a second house in California, often in areas where there's WUI or floodplain or slope issues. So it's not a simple project. It's a viable project, but not a simple project. And when you're first starting out, a lot of this stuff is going to feel kind of like a fire hose of information. And so I sort of try and chip away at it. Do you have the space? I think particularly in Corte Madera and Larkspur, Sausalito is another one. It looks like we've got Robert here. Great. I will be asking him some things here in a second, but height limits, which you don't see in areas that tend to be flatter without as much floodplain, aren't as much of a big deal, as much of a restriction on ADUs as they can be in your cities, both from a section of on a slope. Where do you measure the height from? What is 16 feet tall? But also then with the floodplain, where it feels like you've got plenty of space to build the ADU, but when you start looking at the restrictions in, as you say, building envelope, how high can it be? Where can it be on the property? Suddenly things can get a little bit trickier. And so I encourage everybody who's looking to build an ADU is as much as I want them to be built quickly, don't rush out and enter into a design contract with an architect or a contractor or a prefab company. Do some of due diligence yourself. And there's a lot of tools that are available. There's us. A thing I'll throw out there is Marin Map. Marin Map is a great publicly available mapping tool that you can look up your own parcel, you can see your zoning, you can see some of the flood data, you can see a lot of the the important information that's going to determine what's possible for your ADU. And then of course, we can also help interpret some of that information as well. Robert, oh, you were here, then you finished. Oh no, you're still here. Okay. So we were just talking about sort of basic current zoning laws, current ADU rules for Corte Madera and Larkspur. I know there's a lot of overlap with Sausalito as well. Are there things that sort of maybe aren't as the same as they are with many areas in the state?
So, hi everyone. I guess it wouldn't be a Monday without some technical difficulties.
That's right.
So our ordinance that Sausalito adopted is pretty much the state law, verbatim regarding the ADUs. So we may have one slight difference where we do have a limit in size of between 800 and 850 square feet for a one bedroom, but definitely a 1,000 square foot ADU limit for more than one bedroom, which
right.
I think is a little bit less than what the state law allows.
Right. Yeah, there is some, and we're going to talk about sizes in a little bit later as well. I want to bring up the 800 square foot state exempt ADU and less, particularly when it comes to some of the regulations that come into play. I am actually going to also make a recall here that one of our attendees brought up is junior ADUs. And there is, after speaking to many hundreds of homeowners at this point, there's a lot of confusion about what's a junior ADU versus what's a regular ADU. And I believe in all three jurisdictions, you're allowed one of each, a regular ADU and a junior ADU. Is that right? The county is a little bit different. Unincorporated county, they've got a slightly different metric, but
in Corte Madera, we do require that the junior ADU be combined with a detached ADU.
Interesting. Okay, that's great. So to define a junior, it's a subset of other ADUs. It's not necessarily exclusionary. And what I mean by that is, a regular ADU can be very small. It can be under 500 square feet. It can be built within the house, an interior conversion or a attached garage conversion. And those could be regular ADUs, but they could also be a junior ADU. So a junior ADU is less than 500 square feet. It comes from existing space, and this is a big one. This is one that filters out a lot of people's projects. Is that if you're going to build a junior, it's not an addition, it's not detached, it's not above the garage. It has to come from existing space within the house, within the structure, and that can include a detached or an attached garage. Excuse me, an attached garage. There are a couple of other restrictions with junior ADUs that can throw into people's decision matrix. If you build a regular ADU, you've got the main house and you've got the ADU, there is no owner occupancy requirement. So you don't have to live on the property. You could move to Idaho and rent them both out. With a junior, you have to live on the property, either in the junior ADU or in the regular ADU to rent the other one out. There's also across all ADUs, there's no short-term rentals, there's no VRBO, there's no any of that. So nothing less than 30 days. But another thing that I was just talking to a homeowner actually in unincorporated Mill Valley last week, who wants to do a junior for their mother-in-law. And he was debating, he was going to convert his garage, and he was debating between whether he should do it as a regular ADU or as a junior ADU, and realized he wanted a connecting door between his mother-in-law's space and the main house. And as I understand it, and Bill, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but as I understand it, with building, the way the building code is written, if it's a regular ADU, there can be no connecting door between the two spaces. But if it's a junior, that is allowed.
Definitely allowed in a junior. And
Yeah.
Alex, I'm gonna have to lean on you a little bit here in terms of the latest, because I thought there wasn't, but that may have changed.
So that day, I should say, yeah, that is one of, I should have mentioned that earlier. That's kind of a city of Larkspur quirk. We do allow for interconnection between the ADU and the main home.
Okay.
Do
Yeah,
as well,
that's
as long as it's adequately fire separated. So that's in the assembly of the connection. It couldn't be just
Right.
an opening. It would have to be a fire door, for instance. So we do allow the point of connection if somebody wants
Right.
that.
that's
So just to
great.
be clear, the fire rating is you're having a separation so that which impedes the flow of fire from one unit to the other, and that includes doors. You can have doors, but they need to have sealing around them and of a certain construction to resist
Self-closing, things
yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, that's great.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, that's a great wrinkle. That's actually fairly rare across the state. That most of the time, if you have a regular ADU, you can't have a connecting door. I know for a lot of folks, building with family in mind is something where you can have that. It'd be nice to have that internal connection. All junior ADUs and regular ADUs have to have an exterior door, obviously. And in a junior, you don't have to build a bathroom in the junior. They can share the sanitation facilities, bathroom facilities in the main house. So there are some some choices there to be made, some benefits and some challenges when it comes to a junior. If you wanted to maximize your property and build both, you need to think carefully about where that junior is going to fit, and of course the owner occupancy requirement as well. It tends to be the two big ones that come up for most people. And if you have more, Natasha, if you've got more questions about juniors, we can take more questions for them at the end. We talked about, and Bill, you're probably well suited to answer this. One of the things that, there's the permitting process, the putting together of your application process. And I think for both planning and building, provided you've got a full set of construction drawings, and again, as we said before, this is not a small project. It needs to be well documented. You need to have a full set of construction drawings and structural engineering and all that kind of stuff. But once building and planning, the two departments in the city kind of have it, there are other agencies that get to weigh in as well, including including PG&E, but other agencies can often be other agencies' costs, other agencies' requirements can often be a surprise or an unwelcome cost to a project. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Bill?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll talk about it from the standpoint of a small sanitary district, but it's the analogy is there. It's just a matter of different scales. But for example, with the county, where the district that I manage, the county distributes distributes the building permits, but they basically just tell the residents, you need to talk to your sanitary district, you need to talk to MMWD, et cetera. It's not a very strong linkage between the homeowner or the applicant being told that it's not going to happen necessarily on its own. In fact, it won't happen on its own. So what I try to avoid happening, at least in the sanitary district where I work, and I'm trying to encourage this for Larkspur too, is that that we cross notify each other as agencies, but really make it clear to the applicants that they need to make sure they've done the legwork on this. So, for example, what that means is contacting the other agencies directly, contact the sanitary district directly, contact MMWD directly, see what their process is, see how far along you have to get with the building department before you, before they do their reviews. So, for example, what we're doing in Larkspur is reminding people when they come in that that this is the case. They're going to have to talk to the sanitary district. I'm also proactively sending messages to the sanitary district, trying to connect people together. What we don't want to happen is that late in the process, people find out that they need to they either have a review that's due by the sanitary or water and or fees and or a associated amount of time that's required to do that. And especially that something that they're assuming is okay, or maybe that the contractor okayed, or maybe even that the building agency, implied is not actually the case. So, for example, different agencies have different requirements in terms of sewer connections. Some want to have a complete separation between an ADU unit and like different laterals, separate laterals. Some would require laterals from an ADU, one from the main house to go directly all the way to the main connection. Others would be okay with it being a tie-in, on the property. All these things, affect obviously cost and time, and it's an extra, scope of work. And then there's projects where you have an attached ADU or a space that's being converted into an ADU. It's attached and it can tie in easily, and all the district wants to see is some type of a clean out. The reasoning behind this is that, just like with fire, when you have potential for two separate occupants who necessarily aren't communicating like a family would, if one thing happens, like a sewer backup or a fire, in one, you want to make sure that that doesn't spread to the other one. So anyway, so yeah, I would encourage being as proactive as possible with with those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Tracy?
I was just going to add that in Corte Madera, our sanitary district is our public works department, so it's an in-house sanitary district, and obviously our fire department is nearby and serves several jurisdictions. But your building permit in Corte Madera is passed through those agencies by the building department. They act as a clearinghouse, so it helps. In Corte Madera, we're unique in that way, in that our sewer district is part of the town. So that leaves you with separate agencies. Still, you have the water district, and you have maybe the school district if you have school impact fees to pay with an ADU over 500 square feet. So a little bit in Corte Madera, the process of reviewing it by agencies is driven a little bit more by the town here.
Yeah, and that's something that I try and get across as often as I can with homeowners who are not familiar with this process. It's not designed to be an easily understood process from the start. Is that the city is not a monolith. The county is not a monolith. It is different departments, different agencies. They have different authority. They have different rule sets. And I always offer, when you're talking to planning or talking to building or talking to public works, ask the question, who else should I be talking to about this? Does this impact fire? Does this impact the sewer district? Does this impact who else needs to be on this, essentially on this line of approval? And that can sometimes surface things early on. Even when you're just sort of sketching out your project as a homeowner, you're not fully into a design process. You're trying to figure out what you can do. It's a good idea to start the dialogue with all the city agencies that you can, or city, county, sewer, water, fire, that you can, to try and get feedback early on so that you're not making choices that won't be allowed or will be expensive to fix later on. This really is a process where the more homework you do right up front, as daunting as it is, can really pay off hugely down the road. I know that we're seeing with PG&E, we're seeing more and more separate meters required for ADUs on smaller and smaller units in ways that they didn't used to interpret the rule just a year ago. And so the costs of your utility connections, whether that's water, sewer, electrical, have risen pretty dramatically for a lot of ADU projects across the state. And so it really is important, I think, for homeowners, if you're thinking about this. I don't want to scare anybody off. It is a great project, but there are potentially big costs, 5 figures for utility connections pretty quickly, if that's what's going to be required for your project. And maybe if you downsize it, or maybe if you change the type of project that it is, some of those costs may go away or maybe reduced to make your project make more sense for you ultimately in the end. So, one thing I also want to talk about, since we're close with the utilities and fire, is WUI. WUI and fire code, and how that can affect a project. Does anyone want to jump in on that? I was going to say hot topic, but I really shouldn't say hot topic. Does anyone want to jump in on the WUI topic?
Well, I mean, from a building standpoint, it's mostly a material, construction and detailing requirements that you have to pay attention to, which can add X amount of costs. But they also happen to be the types of things that types of building components that usually mean the buildings last longer anyway. So, for example, cementitious paneling, siding, or shingles, essentially what you know as hardy panel
Right.
by the trade name, would be something that's going to be cost efficient in terms of its longevity. And other fire resistant, there are things more than just the materials, obviously, like screenings of eaves that are nothing particular about ADUs. It's just general building code attention. So
yeah, and that's something I think that is important for everyone to recognize. Again, it's that you're building a second house. It may be small, but it's a second house from the state of the building code, from the perspective of the building code. And the building codes have gotten much more stringent, much better about preparing for fires. I mean, we've all learned over the last decade, 15 years, how quickly destructive fires can be. And the building code has responded, I think, to a lot of those things, and things that used to be only required in sort of extreme conditions we're seeing that in more and more cases where it's a good idea to build that way. It's now becoming required to build that way. So something to consider. Also, I think, on your list of agencies, if you're a homeowner and you're thinking about doing this and you have a pretty good idea of what you want to build, I think, your fire marshal, your local fire marshal for your fire district, is someone that you should be talking to. For a number of reasons. If you are required to have sprinklers for reasons for your particular project, that affects the water supply to the property. That can affect ultimately your utility hookups and costs. And so there are all these interrelated aspects of building an ADU that you want to try and gather early in the process to make sure that the project makes sense.
I'll point out, Scott, just thinking of the you're going to have siding, building material requirements for WUI. You're going to have roofing requirements for WUI for standards. You're also going to have window and door and glazing, requirements.
And size of openings and the amount of openings on a wall, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'd also like to add, if you're in Corte Madera, we do limit the number of ADUs in our Christmas Tree Hill area. So if you are in that area of town, as a first step, you'll want to reach out to Tracy or myself and check if an ADU is an option.
Yeah. And
sorry,
Alex, go, please.
I just to kind of add on to that, there was a question earlier asking about, for Larkspur and Madrone Canyon, are ADUs allowed? There was a prohibition on them for a long time. That is no longer in effect. So if you're in Madrone Canyon, you can have an ADU.
Right. So do you guys have you had experience with people trying to build ADUs when they're in HOA?
We have HOAs where ADUs are constructed, and my understanding is an HOA can't, that would conflict with state law if they were to say prohibit ADUs. There's many things that HOAs can prohibit, is my understanding, but ADUs is not one of them, and I will stand corrected if that's not the case, if anyone else has different information. But
that's my understanding as well. State law trumps it in this case. They can have restrictions. They can put limits in terms of, but it has to be clearly published. I can't remember what the exact phrase was, but sort of easily understandable limits on ADU, but they can't rule them out entirely. So there has to be some way that somebody can build an ADU if you're under an HOA. So a lot of HOAs, we've seen reports of this across the state have not complied with this, or aren't aware that this is now the rule. And so if you do have a problem with HOA, with your particular HOA, the California Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, has an ADU portal where, as a homeowner, you can go and you can request clarification, request help to help navigate some of those issues. It's a small team there, so their response time may be a week or so out, but they are kind of the keepers of the flame about what the ADU rules are supposed to be around the state. So if you're having an issue like that, I would recommend reaching out to the HCD, Housing and Community Development Department, their ADU portal. There's a button you can say, I'm a homeowner and I have a question or I have a concern. Let's talk about fees. If you guys want to talk about, if you guys are ready to talk about fees. One of the most common questions, I said probably the three most common questions I get are, can I build something? What can I build and how much is this going to cost? Cost of construction are not something we're going to go into in this webinar. We'll be bringing more webinars to ADU Marin later that will be covering those things. But from the city's perspective, there are permits and not a single permit. It can be multiple permits, including other districts. How does that work? What is that sort of in real rough ballpark numbers? Every project is different. I'm going to standard disclaimer. Every project is different. But in terms of real rough ballpark, what does the fee schedule look like for an ADU?
In Corte Madera, if you need an ADU permit from planning, that's an $850 flat fee. Most ADUs we're seeing in Corte Madera do not need the planning ADU permit. They go straight to building permit. And the building permit costs are, looking at the last handful that we did, are ranging around $3,000 to $4,000 in total, and that includes a 1% street impact fee that's charged on the valuation, and includes plan check fees. And it's hard to distill exactly the permit cost just for an ADU, because lots of people are doing many different things, and an ADU is part of the project. And that obviously there's also public works fees, permits that are separately charged for an encroachment permit or a floodplain permit or the sewer permit. And then if you need fire sprinklers, a fire sprinkler permit fee. And we mentioned before, MMWD has fees that they charge, and then the school district does charge a developer impact fee for ADUs over 500 square feet. I think it's around $3 a square foot or so.
And that's actually a pretty good list of who else you're going to want to talk to in your planning stage of who's going to charge you a fee for a permit. Because if someone's going to be reviewing your project, whether that's a utility or the fire department or planning and building, they're going to charge you a fee. So people who are going to charge you a fee for a permit are probably somebody you should be talking to in the pre-construction phase, the first steps of figuring out what you can do and what those fees are going to look like.
And I'd add kind of one way to, if you're trying to keep your fees as low as possible, is build a smaller ADU. If you're under 500 square feet, then you wouldn't trigger school impact fees. And then also too, per state law, if you're under 750 square feet, you don't trigger any impact fees. So in Corte Madera, we have a street impact fee that's based on the valuation of the permit. And if your size of your ADU is under 750, then you don't have to pay that fee. So that can be a way to kind of lower your fees by building a smaller unit.
Yeah, that's, sorry, go ahead, Tracy.
I was just gonna add that, we kind of see a wide range of ADUs here. We see the small JADU that has no bathroom and a very minimal kitchen. And then we see a very large detached ADU with all the bells and whistles. And so our permit fees can swing wildly from, $1,200 to $7,000 or $8,000. And so Martha's right, by limiting the scope of your project, capturing interior space for your ADU or making it small or making it JADU, you do typically see the cost of the soft costs being lower.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I sort of hinted at this before, and thank you both of you for giving me the perfect on-ramp for this discussion of the size of the ADU and the cost that you're going to get, and soft costs being I call them the paper costs of your project, permits, design, engineering, not boards and nails. Well, nobody uses nails anymore. Boards and screws and sheetrock, but the actual, the paper cost of your project. And size can play into this a lot. So if you're under 500 square feet, as Tracy said, you're minimizing the fees that you're going to end up paying. So a lot of fees get waived if you're under 500 square feet. But once you touch 500 square feet and go to 749 square feet, you're going to pay, it's a small, medium, large, so Goldilocks kind of rule. The middle of the range, 500 to 749, you're going to pay some impact fees. You're going to pay a bit more fees than you would pay on the 500 square foot or less ADU. And then once you're over 750 square feet, you're going to pay more fees. And all those fees, even if you're at the maximum size, are going to be far less than a regular single family house fee would be. Usually half to a quarter of what those fees would be. But the fees do go up in sort of size category. And there are often get the question about the size question, because some people have heard, well, there's fees that break at certain points. Bill, did you want to jump in?
I was just gonna say a lot of what's been mentioned obviously applies to Larkspur as well, but I will tie this into the fact that there's the fees that are being charged by building rates that are associated typically with scale, right? But then often what people are not expecting or not budgeting for or accounting for is the other soft costs that they have to contribute that maybe they didn't think was necessary. And I was answering one of the questions about pre-built structures, and this is something I've run into the last few months of being in Larkspur is the assumption is, and the budgeting is, well, this is already built, I just want to legalize it, I don't really need to do anything, right? And unfortunately, we need to have a documentation that's reviewable. So that means a plan set. Now, for the scale of a project like an ADU or even a single family house, you're not required by the code to have an architect's stamp and the things that would start to escalate the prices. It could be a drafted set, but it still is necessary, and it takes time and it takes a little bit of money to do that. So it seems like I've been conveying a lot in the last few months. Just because you have this existing thing done doesn't mean we're just going to rubber stamp it. In fact, in some ways, it's a little bit harder, because when we're retroactively legalizing an ADU, or say we had a detached unit that was an office on a single family property, was completely code compliant as an office. It was approved years ago as a separate exterior office space. The conversion of it into an ADU was not difficult by any means, but we still needed to have it as a new use, going from an office to a residential use. It still required a set of documentation, and we couldn't use the older documents because they were by another architect for another project, and legally they're copyrighted. So these are the types of things that start, people will come back later and say, well, I didn't realize I was going to have to spend so much money on that soft cost. I didn't realize it was going to take this extra amount of time. The actual review time can be very short, but sometimes it's the back and forth time of somebody coming in, submitting something, and then are saying, okay, well, now you need this these additional documents, and then it takes someone a certain amount of time to go figure that out, who they're going to use, and to return it back. And next thing you know, the process is taking a lot longer than it otherwise would if they came in just totally prepared and not surprised by the requirements.
Yeah, and I think thank you. That's something I want to touch on before we get to the Q&A here, which we will hear in a moment. But amnesty programs, there's often things called amnesty programs or touted as ADU amnesty programs for ADUs that have frankly been around for a while, but they weren't built with permits originally, or weren't built because it was very hard to permit an ADU before 2017. And it's a question we get a lot. And in truth, we don't actually handle that question much. We say, go talk to your city, because it is always sort of a process internal to the city to help get that ADU legalized. And for your towns, is there maybe not so much a formal amnesty program, but what would that, if someone has an unpermitted ADU, and let's say it's worst case scenario, they bought the house, it was unpermitted, they don't have drawings, where should they start with you folks in starting that process to make it a legal residence?
They should start with probably with the planning department, just to make sure that it's not infeasible. And it usually is feasible. Most of these conversations end in the planning department telling this individual to speak to the building official about what construction may be required to bring it up to current code, and what the permitting process is going to look like from there. And oftentimes people are mistaken that they just need a permit to stick a kitchen in, and it depends on what the status of this unit is. Was the entire structure built without permit, or was just a kitchen inserted in the rec room without permit? And those are different scenarios for the building department in Corte Madera.
Yeah, in Sausalito, we really do work with the homeowners to find any information that may reference the unit in question. Right now, with our code updates and the recent state law, we're really looking at any unit that can be proven to have existed prior to January 1st, 2018. In the past, we have accepted affidavits from neighbors. We do have sometimes, even though a homeowner may have just purchased a property that has this unit, their neighbor has lived there for 30 or 40 years and can is willing to sign an affidavit stating that the unit has been used as an ADU and rented out separately for a number of years, but really looking for that prior to January 1st, 2018. So it just depends on what documentation is out there, but we are pretty accepting of anything that can help us get to that, work with the owner for establishing the ADU, and talk to planning.
Yeah, I think it's important to note here, because I think a lot of folks who are looking at ADUs don't have a lot of experience in working with city planning and building departments, and you guys often get a bad rap, I think unfairly. I think it's important to say loudly at this point is that you guys, the cities, you want ADUs to happen. You're trying to find a way to make these happen. It's important to the affordable housing. It's important to housing equity. It's important to the promises that you've made to the state of California that you're going to do. ADUs are you're not trying to drag your feet on these things. That has to be balanced, however, by life safety. This is going to be a residence that someone's going to be paying money for, that they're going to live in, that needs to be a safe, up to code place for them to live, short-term, long-term. And so, it can be, from a homeowner's perspective, it can feel like, well, there's all these hoops. They don't really want me to do this. I think the cities, I think you guys are all nodding, you do want these ADUs to happen, but it has to be happening in a way that is safe for the renter and for the property itself and the neighbors and everything else. It has to meet a certain standard. And sometimes that gulf, I mean, I know of ADUs, that weren't permitted that are 35, 40 years old, that maybe they weren't built to code even back then. And it's going to be a big job to get them up to code today. But if you're that homeowner and you own this unpermitted ADU and you rent out this unpermitted ADU, you're exposing yourself to a massive amount of liability if anything should go wrong, or that renter has an issue with the situation. Renting an unpermitted ADU is potentially far, far more expensive than getting that ADU up to code. And so if you do have an unpermitted ADU out there, talk to your planning department, start that process, figure out what's going to happen. It's not like you're going in, to confess a crime. They're not going to suddenly shut you down or come red tag your property. The city's going to try and work with you to figure out how to make this place, an affordable rental that they can show on their books, which is beneficial to them as too. Okay, so we're at 6:51. We've got 9 minutes. I know we've got a ton of questions, so I'm going to jump to that really quickly. And I think we answered the HOA question. State law rules, HOA has to allow them, and they have to have a clear, concise set of restrictions for an ADU that do not rule them out completely. Discounts on fees. I know the county has some for a deed restriction that allows it to make it affordable, and we'll be talking about that on Thursday when we have the county here. You guys don't have any fee fee discounts or anything like that currently, right? Okay. The ADU restrictions supersede the newish state law. I think that might be in reference to the HOA. State law is always going to trump that. State law has primacy in that case, and so it's not going to be easy to unwind if the HOA doesn't want to unwind it, but state law is always going to trump that one. So this is for Martha. It says, since homeowners building ADUs help Corte Madera enormously by lowering the town's requirement for building housing, why doesn't Corte Madera waive all the fees for small ADUs?
That's a good question. We are updating our fee schedule, so there could be an opportunity for potentially fee waivers through that process. So I suggest you may want to provide comments as the town updates fees. And the fees that are collected on the building permit are really designed to cover the cost of staff reviewing the building permit. We use plan checkers, third-party plan checkers, and the town pays them money to review permits. So mostly the money for the building permits is going to staff time reviewing permits. But I do, you may want to provide those comments when we get to a point where we're evaluating our current fee schedule.
And the building permit fees also go towards your inspections. So depending on the scope of work, you're having the inspector come out numerous times to inspect the work. And that's the other part of the permit fees that's cost recovery, just for your information.
I think, yeah, cost recovery is a really great point. One of the things that one of the challenges I think of having having ADUs get permitted quickly is that most jurisdictions are understaffed, and it's because the budget for staffing, they get some of that cost recovery from fees, and so that helps pay for the staff, that helps the process go smoother, that helps it go faster. So I think there are options for fees to be waived or fees to be lowered, but ultimately it is paying for the people to do the work who need to do the work to get your ADU built in the first place. We have how much are impact fees over 750? Say for example, an 800 square foot. That's a hard question to answer, but if you guys want to throw kind of a ballpark increase there, no is acceptable.
Well, one of our impact fee that's charged on ADUs, the street impact fee over 750 is based on the project valuation. So the amount that you put on your building permit application for what it costs you to construct it, and that's charged at 1%. So that can equate to $1,000 or even several $1,000s, depending on how much this unit costs you to build. And then the school impact fee is charged by the school district. And I think that's around $3.30 a square foot. So it's based upon the size that you construct. And it's only for ADUs over 500. And there's education code that says that they can charge it. And they can also choose to waive it. And we haven't seen anyone doing that yet for our school district.
Yeah. Electrical panel for ADUs. That can be a tricky question depending on the type of ADU and size of ADU. And Bill, if you want to jump in or correct me if I'm wrong, but I was talking to an electrician the other day, and basically, what I'm hearing about what PG&E is requiring is if the ADU is separate, if it has its own address, if it's a separate structure, it needs its own meter.
Yeah.
So I think for smaller ADUs, internal ADUs, junior ADUs, sub panel, you need to have that separated. But it doesn't necessarily have to be its own meter. But once you start talking about a separate residence, as you would with a regular ADU,
right,
then your costs go up.
Yep.
Okay. Restrictions on renting these ADUs, regular monthly unfurnished rentals, no Airbnb. I thought these were supposed to generate affordable rentals. And that's true. There is no short-term rental. It's a 30-day minimum for these ADUs. So no Airbnb, no VRBO. Whether they're furnished or unfurnished, that's up to the landlord, the new landlord who's creating an ADU. And in fact, I briefly want to talk about when a lot of the focus is on building the ADU, getting it permitted, getting it constructed. But the truth is, it's going to be an operation. As a homeowner, you're going to be a landlord for a lot longer than you're going to be in construction management. And that's, I think, an equally important part to research and think about and look at before you jump into an ADU project. And I've spoken to a number of fair housing folks around the North Bay, and they all recommend basically sort of 3 no-low press books. If you've never been a landlord, and you're thinking about going into this and you're going to be renting your unit, you want to educate yourself and make sure that you're being a landlord in compliance with state law, that your expectations, rights, and responsibilities are all kind of in your mind as you go through this process. And so Amity is going to drop 3 links in chat for the books that were recommended to me by the fair housing folks of what a homeowner should know before they become a landlord, or what they should reference when they are a landlord. Something to think about. Even if you're renting to family, sometimes with family, it's more important to have a good set of rules laid down than even to someone who's not family. So those are the links in the chat to consider. Those we'll consider to be the best resources that people can easily find. Does the city reassess home values after an ADU is built?
The city doesn't, the county may.
Yeah, this is an assessor's office issue. And so they will look at the construction value of the ADU, and base their so if you've lived in that place for a long time and your tax basis is fairly low, they don't reassess the whole property. They don't reassess the existing house. They will assess based on the construction done for the new ADU, whatever that looks like. If that's a $100,000 project or a $700,000 project, they're going to assess based on the construction value of the work done for the ADU. So it does affect property taxes. It's also going to affect homeowners insurance. It's now rental property. And so you want to think through all those changes as well, that it does change your property in kind of a fundamental way. Change the valuation of the property. It's now going to be worth more because you've got a rental unit on there as well. So all of those pieces are something to think about and add to the hopper of decisions to think about when you get started with your ADU project.
And Scott, the agencies, the cities where we report our permitting totals and our approvals to the county assessor's office. So that's information that we're required to report directly every month to the county assessor.
Yeah. So it's you can't really get out of it. Something to put into your project budget as you go forward. There's one other question about white line parking in their neighborhood, and this is in Corte Madera, I believe, or is this Larkspur?
There was a follow-up comment that said it was for Larkspur that I had responded to, but I just, for everyone, to my knowledge, that's not a reason to deny an ADU. I haven't. It doesn't ring any bells for me. I'm happy to connect off of this call if you want to provide an address, and I can maybe see if what else might have been going on. To my knowledge, at least in the past year, the city hasn't denied any ADU applications.
Okay. Well, great. I think that wraps us up. We're at 7 o'clock. I want to thank all our panelists here for sharing us with your wisdom and your experience with ADUs. I hope we've been able to answer some questions for homeowners out there. You can always follow up with us. You can email us at info@adumarin.org. You can follow up with the panelists here at their city offices. I believe Amity put people's emails in chat. But don't hesitate to reach out if you've got more questions. We really want to help you get started if that's what you're hoping to do. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.